At first, everything looked stable in the life of a woman like Emma, a 52-year-old school office worker in Ohio who had spent more than 3 decades doing everything she was told was responsible. She worked full-time, never missed a shift, raised 2 children, helped pay for college expenses when she could, supported her aging mother through medical visits, and always made sure the bills were paid on time. From the outside, her life looked controlled and dependable. But what no one saw was the quiet weight she carried every night when the house went silent. She would sit at her kitchen table, opening envelopes she had already delayed reading for days, watching numbers that never seemed to grow in her favor. Retirement statements sat in folders she barely touched because every time she looked, she felt the same sinking confusion. How did years of hard work still feel like they were not enough? And she wasn't alone. Across America, millions of women who did everything right are beginning to ask the same question in their own way, often in silence, often late at night, wondering how stability slowly turned into uncertainty without any single moment they could point to. And this is where the real story begins, because what happened to women like Emma is not tied to one mistake or one decision, but to a slow accumulation of habits that felt harmless at the time. Years of putting everyone else first, years of delaying financial planning because life always felt too busy, years of telling themselves there would be more time later to figure it out. But later has a way of arriving quietly, without warning, and when it does, it brings a difficult realization. Financial freedom does not usually disappear in a single moment. It fades through repetition, through small choices that seem insignificant in isolation but powerful over time. And most women only recognize this pattern when they finally sit down and face the numbers head-on, often after decades have already passed. And before that realization fully settles in, there is already a sense of urgency building, a quiet pressure that something important has been slipping away unnoticed. Tonight, we uncover the 7 hidden habits behind it, and why they affect millions of women across America. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What is really keeping women financially stuck? This question has quietly followed millions of women across America for years, often without them even realizing it. And what makes it more difficult to understand is that this isn't about one woman, or one mistake, or one bad decision. It is about millions of similar financial patterns repeating across everyday lives, across different cities, different backgrounds, and different stories that all begin to look strangely alike when examined closely. Women like Emma Carter are not rare in this situation. In fact, they represent something much larger happening in silence. Hardworking women who did everything they were told to do correctly, yet still find themselves asking why financial stability feels further away the longer they work. Why do so many women who have steady incomes still feel behind financially, as if something never quite added up? Why does retirement, something that should feel like a natural reward after decades of effort, begin to feel more distant even when the paychecks continue coming in? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, what are the habits, decisions, and quiet routines that slowly shape financial futures without ever being recognized as dangerous in the moment? These are not questions that have simple answers, because they are not caused by a single event. They are caused by patterns that repeat, so often they begin to feel normal. Across different lives, you begin to see the same rhythm appear. A woman working long shifts and coming home too exhausted to think about long-term planning. Another focused entirely on raising children while postponing her own financial future for later. Another quietly avoiding retirement statements because the numbers feel uncomfortable to face. Different lives, same emotional undercurrent. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that this is not an isolated problem, but a widespread financial experience that many women only fully recognize when they reach their 40s or 50s. And what makes this even more important is that most of these patterns do not feel harmful while they are happening. In fact, they often feel responsible, necessary, even practical. But over time, these small, repeated behaviors begin to influence every financial decision that follows. And this is where the real investigation begins, because the first habit we are about to explore seems almost too harmless to matter at all. Yet it quietly affects nearly every financial choice women make after 40. Emma Carter's story is not unusual, and that is exactly what makes it so important to understand. For more than 30 years, Emma Carter lived a life that on the surface looked responsible, stable, and carefully managed. She worked steady hours in a school administrative office in Ohio, arriving early, staying late when needed, and making sure every responsibility was handled before she left for the day. Her mornings began with routine, her afternoons filled with tasks, and her evenings often ended with exhaustion that left little room for anything beyond immediate needs. Like many women in her generation, she did not ignore her financial responsibilities, but she often placed her own long-term future behind everything else that demanded attention in the moment. When Emma Carter was raising her children, every financial decision revolved around them. School fees, groceries, household expenses, unexpected medical visits, and daily responsibilities always came first. Retirement planning or long-term investing was something she thought she would get to later, when life became less demanding. But life rarely becomes less demanding in the way people expect. Instead, responsibilities shift and expand. After her children grew older, new responsibilities appeared, including supporting family members, helping with unexpected expenses, and adapting to rising living costs that never seemed to slow down. Each stage of life brought something urgent enough to push long-term financial planning further into the background. Not because Emma Carter did not care about her future, but because there was always something more immediate that required her attention. Something more pressing. Something that felt more important in the moment. And over time, that pattern became normal. Decisions were made based on urgency, not long-term direction. Financial planning became something she intended to focus on when things settle, even though things rarely settled in the way she imagined. At the same time, the world around her was changing quietly in ways that were not always easy to notice day by day. The cost of everyday living slowly increased. Groceries became more expensive. Housing costs shifted upward. Healthcare expenses became more unpredictable. And for many women like Emma Carter, these rising costs did not come with extra financial education or guidance on how to adjust long-term planning. Instead, they adapted in real time, making small adjustments just to keep things balanced month to month. There were also emotional patterns shaping her financial decisions without her fully realizing it. Moments of stress after long workdays sometimes led to small purchases that provided temporary relief. Helping others emotionally or financially often came before helping herself. And like many women in her situation, financial learning was not something she was taught deeply when she was younger, especially when it came to investing, retirement growth, or long-term wealth planning strategies. It was simply not part of the everyday conversation in her early adulthood. Without realizing it, certain patterns begin forming. Not dramatic changes, not sudden decisions, but quiet repetitions over time. Choices made in moments of fatigue, responsibility, and care for others that slowly shape the direction of an entire financial future. And for Emma Carter, like millions of women across America, those patterns would only become clear much later than she ever expected. Emma Carter's financial reality, like that of millions of women across America, did not shift because of one dramatic moment. It shifted through repetition, through habits that felt small, responsible, and even necessary at the time. And as we begin to look deeper into her financial pattern, the first habit reveals something many people overlook for years. Habit number 1. Waiting for the perfect time. For Emma Carter, the idea of planning for retirement or investing was never something she rejected. It was something she postponed. There was always a reason that felt valid in the moment. When her children were younger, she told herself she would focus on it once they were more independent. When work became more demanding, she told herself she would get to it when life slowed down. When expenses increased, she told herself she needed more stability first before making long-term financial decisions. The belief was simple and common. I'll start when life settles. But life rarely settles in the way people imagine. Responsibilities do not disappear, they simply change shape. And over time, that belief quietly delayed years of potential financial growth without ever feeling like a mistake in the moment. Emma Carter never felt like she was doing something wrong. In fact, she felt responsible for waiting until she could do it properly. But waiting is only the beginning. Because waiting, when repeated over many years, becomes a habit of postponement. And postponement in financial life does not pause time. It moves it forward without you. Habit number 2, emotional spending cycles. For Emma Carter, Emotional spending did not look extreme or reckless. It was subtle. A small purchase after a stressful day. A comforting online order during moments of exhaustion. A little reward after handling responsibilities that felt overwhelming. It was not about luxury or excess. It was about relief. The cycle was always the same. Stress builds, a purchase follows, temporary relief appears, and then reality returns quietly the next day when bills and responsibilities remain unchanged. Over time, these moments begin to form a pattern that is easy to overlook because individually, they never feel significant. But then comes the accumulation. Small decisions that feel harmless alone begin to create financial pressure when repeated consistently over months and years. And for Emma Carter, like many women in her situation, this pattern never felt like a financial issue at first. It felt like coping. And then comes something even more subtle. Habit number 3, lifestyle inflation. As Emma Carter's income slowly increased over the years, her financial comfort did not always increase with it. Instead, expenses naturally expanded alongside income. A slightly better car to feel more reliable. A few more subscriptions that made life easier. More convenience purchases that saved time after long workdays. At first, these changes felt like progress. A reward for years of hard work. A sign that life was improving. But over time, something less visible began to happen. The gap between income and savings did not grow as expected. Because every increase in income was quietly matched by an increase in spending. This is how lifestyle inflation works. It rarely feels like overspending. It feels like improvement. It feels like earning the right to live more comfortably after years of sacrifice. But the next habit doesn't feel like spending at all. Habit number 4, fear of investing. For Emma Carter, investing always felt like something complicated, distant, and risky. Not because she lacked intelligence, but because she was never truly guided through it in a way that felt accessible. So instead of learning, she hesitated. And instead of hesitating briefly, hesitation turned into avoidance. So her money stayed where it felt safest, untouched, uninvested, and unchallenged. But what felt safe was quietly being affected by something invisible. Inflation. Slowly reducing value over time while the money remained still. And the longer it stayed still, the more intimidating the idea of starting became. And fear leads to something deeper. Habit number 5, avoiding financial reality. Emma Carter did not ignore her finances completely. She simply avoided them when they felt emotionally uncomfortable. Retirement statements were opened late or not at all. Account balances were checked quickly, and then closed just as quickly. Financial planning was something she mentally postponed because it created stress in the moment. But avoidance has a cost of its own. Because what is not faced does not disappear. It grows in emotional weight. And over time, financial anxiety increases not because the situation changes dramatically, but because clarity is never fully allowed to form. And this avoidance pattern begins to affect decisions in subtle ways, creating a loop where uncertainty leads to more avoidance, and more avoidance leads to even greater uncertainty. But avoidance is only half the problem. Habit number 6, over-prioritizing everyone else. For most of her life, Emma Carter was someone others depended on. A mother, a daughter, a coworker, a reliable presence in many people's lives. And over time, this identity became deeply connected to how she made financial decisions. When there was a choice between her own long-term planning and someone else's immediate need, she almost always chose others first. Helping children with expenses, supporting family members during difficult times, covering unexpected costs that felt urgent and important. And while these decisions came from care and responsibility, they also created a pattern where her own financial future was consistently delayed in favor of others. And the final habit is the most dangerous of all. Habit number 7, believing it's too late. At a certain point in Emma Carter's journey, the issue was no longer just habits. It became belief. The quiet thought that began to appear more often. Maybe it's too late now. This belief does not happen suddenly. It builds slowly after years of feeling behind. After years of postponing, after years of watching time move forward while financial confidence does not. And once this belief settles in, something important begins to change. Planning stops feeling urgent. Learning stops feeling useful. And the future starts to feel fixed instead of flexible. But this is also the moment where many women are closer to change than they realize. By the time Emma Carter reached her early 50s, nothing in her financial life looked like a single moment of failure. There was no obvious mistake, no dramatic turning point, no clear event she could point to and say, "This is where everything changed." Instead, what she began to notice was something far more subtle, almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. It was the accumulation of years. The quiet repetition of choices that, at the time, never felt significant enough to question. Sitting alone at her kitchen table one evening, Emma Carter found herself going through old financial statements, retirement notes, and half-forgotten reminders she had saved over the years. And as she looked back, something began to form in her mind. Not panic, not regret in the dramatic sense, but a slow recognition that what she was seeing was not random at all. It was a pattern. Every habit we explored had once felt reasonable. Waiting for the perfect time had felt responsible. Emotional spending had felt like relief after long days. Lifestyle upgrades had felt like earned comfort. Avoiding financial planning had felt like protecting herself from stress. Prioritizing others had felt like love and duty. Even the belief that it might be too late had felt like honesty rather than defeat. But now, when Emma Carter looked at them together, something shifted. Because individually, each choice seemed small, harmless even. But together, they had shaped something much larger than she had ever intended. It was never one mistake. It was repetition of small habits over time. And this realization did not come with blame at first. It came with clarity. A quiet moment where the emotional weight she had been carrying for years began to separate from confusion. Because confusion often makes financial situations feel heavier than they are. But clarity, even when uncomfortable, begins to bring structure to what once felt overwhelming. Emma Carter started to see that her situation was not defined by failure, but by patterns she had never been taught to recognize early enough. Patterns shaped by responsibility, by life demands, by emotional decisions made in moments of pressure, and by years of focusing outward instead of inward when it came to her financial future. And in that realization, something important began to shift. The narrative in her mind slowly moved away from guilt, away from self-blame, away from the idea that she had somehow done everything wrong. Instead, it moved toward awareness, toward understanding, toward the recognition that if these habits were learned, they could also be unlearned. For the first time in a long time, Emma Carter did not see her financial future as something already decided. She began to see it as something still forming. Not perfect, not simple, but still open to change. And that shift from guilt to awareness becomes the most important turning point in this entire story. After that moment of clarity, Emma Carter sat in silence for a while longer than usual. Not because she was lost, but because something inside her was finally settling into place. For years, she had believed that financial stress meant she had already fallen too far behind to recover in a meaningful way. That the gap between where she was and where she wanted to be had somehow become permanent. But now, for the first time, that belief began to feel less like truth and more like assumption. A question slowly formed in her mind, one she had avoided asking directly for a long time. Is it too late? Or has it simply been misunderstood all along? Because when Emma Carter looked at her situation through the lens of habits instead of failure, something changed. Habits could be observed. Habits could be adjusted. Habits could be rebuilt. And that meant her future was not frozen in place, even if it had taken years to fully recognize the patterns that shaped it. What she began to understand is something that quietly applies to millions of women in the same stage of life. Financial rebuilding does not require perfection. It does not require a flawless history, or years of perfect decisions, or a sudden transformation overnight. What it actually requires is direction. A shift away from unconscious repetition and toward intentional awareness. A willingness to see where money is going, why decisions are being made, and what small changes can begin to create movement again. For Emma Carter, this did not feel like a dramatic life change in the moment. It felt more like a quiet adjustment in perspective. Instead of focusing on everything she had not done, she began focusing on what she could still influence. Awareness became the first step. Noticing habits instead of ignoring them. Understanding patterns instead of repeating them blindly. And slowly, that awareness created space for something she had not felt in a long time. Possibility. And with that came another realization. Consistency matters more than intensity. Small financial habits, repeated over time, carry more weight than rare moments of motivation followed by long periods of inaction. Even small decisions, when made intentionally, begin to shift direction gradually. Not instantly but steadily. Emma Carter began to understand that financial change at this stage of life does not come from doing everything at once. It comes from doing small things consistently enough that they begin to reshape the path forward. And perhaps the most important truth she began to accept is this. Many women begin rebuilding in their 40s, 50s, and even beyond. Not because the journey is easy, but because understanding finally replaces confusion. And once understanding is present, action becomes possible again. For Emma Carter, this was not the end of her financial story. It was the beginning of seeing it differently. As Emma Carter began to see her financial life with clearer eyes, something deeper started to settle in. Not excitement. Not sudden confidence. But understanding. The kind of understanding that doesn't erase the past, but finally explains it in a way that makes it feel less heavy than before. For so long, she had believed financial outcomes were shaped by single defining moments. One wrong decision. One missed opportunity. One period of difficulty that determined everything that followed. But now, that belief no longer held the same weight. Because what Emma Carter could finally see was this truth. Financial freedom is rarely destroyed by one big mistake, but shaped by small daily habits repeated over time. Not dramatic events. Not sudden collapses. But ordinary choices that felt insignificant in isolation, yet powerful in accumulation. The decision to delay. The decision to avoid. The decision to spend for comfort. The decision to prioritize others again and again. None of them felt large enough to matter in the moment, but together, they quietly shaped the direction of an entire financial life. And this realization was not meant to create blame. It was never about looking back and judging every choice that had been made. It was about awareness. Because blame keeps people stuck in the past, but awareness allows movement in the present. Emma Carter began to understand that her story was not unusual, and that millions of women across America were navigating similar patterns, often without realizing how normal these habits had felt at the time they were formed. There was no need to rewrite her past with regret. Instead, there was a need to understand it with clarity. And in that clarity, something important began to emerge. A sense that her financial future was not already defined by what had happened before, but still influenced by what she chose moving forward. As she sat there quietly, Emma Carter no longer saw her situation as something closed or finished. It felt open again, even if only slightly. And that subtle shift carried a powerful truth with it. The future is not fixed. It is still being written. As Emma Carter sat with everything she had come to understand, there was no longer the same weight of confusion that had followed her for so long. Instead, there was something quieter, but far more important taking its place: reflection. Not the kind that rewrites the past, but the kind that finally makes sense of it. And now, as this story comes to a close, the question is no longer just about Emma Carter. It extends far beyond her life, reaching into the experiences of millions of women across America, who may see pieces of themselves in this journey. Which of these habits felt the most familiar to you? Was it the waiting for the perfect time, always believing that tomorrow would be less overwhelming than today? Was it the emotional spending, those small moments of relief that quietly added up over time? Was it lifestyle inflation, where progress never quite translated into financial security? Or perhaps it was the fear of investing, or the avoidance of financial reality, or the habit of always putting others first, or even the belief that it might simply be too late. Because the truth is, these patterns are not rare. They are shared experiences that often go unnoticed until later in life, when reflection becomes unavoidable. And if this story helped you see your financial habits differently, even in a small way, then consider subscribing to Emma Invests for more real, emotional financial stories designed for women building a stronger, more intentional future. Stories that are not about blame, but about clarity. Not about fear, but about understanding. And in the next video, we'll explore what financially secure women do differently every single day. Because sometimes the biggest financial changes do not come from dramatic transformations, but from learning what to do differently, one small habit at a time.